Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro is in Tehran. He's meeting his Iranian counterpart, Ebrahim Raisi. They've already signed a 20-year cooperation plan. It covers the energy, finance and defense sectors. They've also spoken about how to ease the effects of US sanctions which have been imposed on their countries. Javier Farje is a journalist and a Latin American affairs analyst. Javier, welcome to the program. Look, I understand it makes sense. Both countries are under US sanctions. Both countries regionally have neighbors who are slightly suspicious of the administrations. But is this a good time for Maduro to be going to meet Iran when it seemed as if the oil crisis produced by the war in Ukraine may have been bringing Maduro closer to the Biden administration and trying to work out some sort of deal?
Well, the political alliance between Venezuela and Iran from the time President Hugo Chavez was in Venezuela and President Ahmadinejad was the president of Iran has always been very important for both countries. There is an economic element in the current alliance. First of all, Iran is helping Venezuela in its output of oil. The production of oil in Venezuela decreased because of many reasons, lack of infrastructure, etc., etc. Now, Iran is helping Venezuela. First of all, there is an investment of $110 million from Iran to rebuild a refinery in Venezuela. Second, Venezuela is importing condensates to dilute the heavy oil that comes from the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela. Venezuela produces heavy crude, and that's very difficult to export before it's been refined. But refining of this oil is difficult because the infrastructure is not there anymore because of many reasons. Iran is helping them to dilute this heavy oil to make it more exportable, especially because Venezuela has increased its output in oil in the last few months, better than it's been for a long time. So there's a mutual need to help each other in terms of the oil production. At the same time, Venezuela export part of that oil to Iran. We must understand that Venezuela and Iran depended heavily on exports of oil to China, but those exports have gone down, which means that they're trying to help each other to make this oil more exportable. In terms of the relation with the U.S., yes, the U.S. has got closer to Venezuela these days, but that closeness has not been good enough because Venezuela demands that there is a lifting of sanctions, and Washington so far has not decided to do that yet.
Javier, how badly have U.S. sanctions affected Venezuela?
Heavily. The sanctions have affected the import of medicines and medical equipment used to treat different illnesses in the Venezuelan health service. That has affected heavily the control of COVID because they didn't have the resources. They were not allowed to import the medicines and all the medical equipment they needed to combat this. At the same time, in terms of economy, it has affected the production of oil in the refineries that Venezuela has in the U.S. They have stopped that, and the U.S. has confiscated, if you like, the production. That means that has been an obstacle for Venezuela to export the oil, which is the main commodity on which Venezuela depends for the income in hard currency. So the sanctions, apart from mismanagement of the economy, but the sanctions have affected heavily Venezuela, which means that this kind of alliances with countries like Iran are strategically important because they can overcome the sanctions by exchanging oil and being able to export it in different markets. So the sanctions have been very, very harsh on Venezuela, and now Venezuela demands that if the U.S. wants a better relation with them, which there have been some talks between both countries, the sanctions will have to be lifted in order for those relationships to improve.
Javier Farje, we always appreciate the analysis. Thank you so much indeed for taking the time to talk to us.